Well, first of all, thanks to all of you for turning up. We weren't really sure if anybody would be interested in anything that we had to say, so this is a good start. So I am very happy to be sitting on a panel with a bunch of very interesting people, and we have sort of question askers on my side, and then here we have industry experts. So sitting with me, I'm obviously Dutch, co-founder of Bike Shed Motorcycle Club. Wife boss is at the back, making sure I do a good job. I'm sitting here with Morgan Gales, who works for Bike Shed, and he's head of experience and club, also a motorcycle journalist, worked Cycle World for a very long time. Paul Drake, who you guys will know as Ziggy Moto. If any of you have seen our fantastic transforming motorcycle, he's the guy that created that. Very much has an engineer's mind as well as being an amazing designer. And we had lots of discussions about what should be powering this motorcycle in the future. And then I'm joined by Grant Bester from Indian Motorcycles, Adrian Sellers from Royal Enfield, and John Hogan from Norton. So we have some proper grown-ups in the room who actually may have an idea of where the industry is going. So I have a burning question, and then we're just going to have a conversation. And my burning question is, so right now we're all having a fantastic time blowing shit up to make wheels go round. Motorcycles are awesome. They're noisy, they're visceral. You have to have a skill, you have to change gear, you have to use a clutch. We use engine braking. We do all sorts of things you're not really aware of. And now we're seeing all of that sort of maybe going away. And there's a guy here somewhere saying, with a T-shirt that says, "I love fossil fuels." So thanks for joining us. But my question is, electric, is that it? Twist and go? Is that it? Who'd like to begin?
I'm the referee. You put me in the middle. So
you are in the middle.
Well, no, it's not it. It's about the motorcycling experience. You know, you talk about, you've just described a bunch of things that we currently associate with motorcycling, and whether it's engine braking or what have you, shifting gears. That's what we do now to get us to the experience we want to have, whether it's a twisties or a racetrack or whatever. Fine. Motorcycling is more than the way we interact with the motorcycle. It is the experience we have with it. And so when we move to electric, I would say we're probably just going to change those ways in which we interact with the thing that is helping us achieve what we want to with a motorcycle. So I don't think we're looking at the end. I think we're looking at just a shift. No pun intended.
But what are the alternatives? What else is out there? What are you guys secretly cooking up? Because we've got people like Claudio Domenicali saying from Ducati, well, you're never going to have the power-to-weight ratio we expect from electric power. And also, where's all the power in the grid anyway, and where does that come from? We're just exporting emissions. We're not really saving anything. So are there other plans with other fuel types and hybrids? And I mean, let's just start with generalistically, because obviously we can talk about electric and the benefits of it.
yeah, I mean, I would kind of say that there's always two sides to any change. There's innovation, which will drive multiple different kinds of changes, and I think that's going to happen in the motorcycle industry. And then there's regulation, and regulation is going to try and push industry in a certain direction to achieve certain goals. I think electrification is incredibly important. It's definitely part of the future, and I think we're all going to be in it at some stage to some varying degree. But I don't think what we have today is going to be end-of-lifed anytime soon. I think there are different ways to look at it. As an example, you take diesel. Many years ago, people said diesel was a terrible technology. And if you didn't open the door and allow some kind of innovation, you wouldn't have AdBlue, and AdBlue wouldn't have created, I'd say, cleaner diesel engines. So I think there are multiple different platforms. There are multiple different technologies that many people are experimenting with at the moment. I think electrification is going to be a big part of that, but I don't think it's going to be the only thing. Honestly, that's my opinion.
I'd almost be interested as well from your perspective of almost how close on that sort of the next step, next generation of each of the brands to electrification. How important on your weekly roster of things that need to be done? Is it a priority? Is it back burner?
Straight to the awkward questions.
That's brilliant.
And then maybe, maybe from a political perspective, you can't answer.
I'm saying that it's something that we're all going to be part of, right?
Yeah.
It is something. It is, whether it's an inevitability in the future is a different question, but it is something now in this moment that we see as being a part of the motorcycling future, and so to that extent, all of us are in one way or another looking at it.
Yeah. And from the little bit of exposure I've had with it, I dealt a little bit with ARC, the guys behind that beautiful bike, and there was talk of a sort of an electrical concept, but obviously it's more complex, isn't it, than just a motor and a battery. There's cooling, there's distance, and the weight, power to weight ratio, and all of those things. Is there something in there? What would be the thing that would unlock? If you like, you're always designing within constraints. Is there one thing within that mix that would liberate the electrification thing?
Make it all really cheap so that we can actually buy these things at a reasonable price and sell them at a reasonable price. I mean, that's what it comes to when we talk about innovation or any of these things. We look at electric cars, right?
Yeah.
Good luck finding a really cheap, inexpensive one. Your petrol cars are currently, you can get them a lot cheaper for the most part. You can get a decent new petrol car. It's a lot of supply chain, a lot of building up, the economies of scale. That's what determines when any of this happens for us.
Yeah, I would probably just add to that and say there's a number of parts to solving the problem. It's not just about an electric bike.
Yeah.
So the ergonomics change a lot, as you know, when you kind of think about electrification and safety, weight, power to weight ratio, but range. So people have range phobia at the moment. So, you get an electric mountain bike and you're out in the mountains and suddenly you're at, 3 bars out of the 5 bars and you're going, holy shit, am I going to make it home or am I not going to make it home? So there's how far can it go and what can it do? There is the ergonomics of the bike and, what kind of a bike you're riding and what experience you want from the bike, cruiser through to sports bike, hyper naked, whatever the case may be. And then there's the biggest problem, in my opinion, which is, if everything is electric, where do you plug it in? How do you use it? Do you swap the batteries? Do you need 500,000 charging stations in every single city? Do we have the grids to be able to support it? So I think at the end of the day, I think there's 3 big considerations that you have to think about, because today, even with electric cars on certain routes on a Friday evening, and you see how they backed up to charge the vehicles. And I think, as you get over that 1,000-kilometer range on a car, for instance, it starts to become less of an issue. So I think there's definitely technology. There's the cost of electrification, which is massive. So you don't make the same money today on electrification that you would in a typical combustion engine. But again, I just want to go back to one statistic, which says today, when you talk about CO2 emissions, it's less than 1% of the global problem, motorcycles. And, it's significant and we have to think about it for sure. There's no question whatsoever, but it's less than 1%. So is there a world where you can coexist with different technologies? I really believe so, yeah.
And in some ways, I guess, they're almost that sort of even the simplest sort of lane correction systems, and we're talking about autonomous driving, that's probably a bigger issue for motorbikes going forwards. If there is a certain level of automation, when everything else is running to a program and controlling itself and steering and lanes changing because it can talk to other vehicles around it, I imagine that's a bigger stumbling block for bikes, because I wouldn't want my bike to suddenly correct my steering because I'm sat on the outside of it.
Maybe that will do us all a favour. Everybody else will be in electric cars that won't crash into each other or knock us off. And we can ride around.
They can all text in peace.
And we can enjoy ourselves. Yes. I mean, where is your head at, John?
I think in terms of innovation, having come from the job that I was in prior to working at Norton, and as a motorcycle journalist for a long time, having the opportunity to test ride what manufacturers are presenting to the market now, and then stepping over the fence and seeing how manufacturers are dealing with the various challenges. There are multiple, and for me, the issue of infrastructure remains a constant question. If you think about when Henry Ford introduced the Model T Ford, it wasn't his responsibility to build the petrol stations in which those cars were refueled. Somebody else took care of that problem, and for me at the minute it feels like the problem of infrastructure is the burden of manufacturers, which is an issue that we need to work with governments across the world to address how we can achieve that. But in terms of other innovations, much like everything in the two-wheel space, if you look at the four-wheel space and where they are and how much further down the tracks they are, you only need to Google, Porsche and e-fuels or synthetic fuels, and they've been developing synthetic technology at their own purpose-built facility in Brazil for 4 or 5 years, and it's coming. I follow a UK company on Twitter that can already sell you fuel, synthetic fuel, it's about £3.50 a litre at the minute. I don't know if anybody saw the supercar test on Top Gear about a year ago. They did no changes to the cars, just drain the tanks, tip this stuff in, 0 emissions, no change in performance. The technology already exists. I think the problem, and there are a stack of problems to address. One is desire. You know, I've ridden all of the electric bikes that you can ride at the minute, and I'm younger than the average demographic in the UK for motorcyclists. But I have no real desire to jump on a silent, clutchless, gearless thing on a Sunday morning. I don't mind admitting it. I'm not quite old enough to love two-strokes, but I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm a sports bike fan from the late 90s. I don't think that box is being ticked yet, and it's, for me, electric technology is more of a mobility solution. What I'd like to see happen is for that desire to be created, and Ducati getting involved with MotoGP in the electric series might tick that box, but I don't know if that's something I'm ready to kind of stick to my bedroom wall yet. I don't stick pictures of bikes to bedroom walls. But you know, in the 90s, you can see exactly what it was. It's a Fireblade, it's an R1, it's an RGV 250, and then as your tastes mature, as your riding experience does, you start to find joy in racing big baggers with you at Lydden or traveling across Europe on a big sports bike. At the minute, there's nothing about electric bikes that makes me think, I get it, I really want one of those.
But you're talking as an existing rider.
Absolutely,
You have to think about the fact that perhaps in a not too distant future, that won't be an issue because that's been your experience since day one.
Yeah, I agree. And again, in terms of, you know, I'm the head of marketing and communications now, finding a way of building brand equity and generating sales demand, that's why I get out of bed now. And it's really hard to try and convince a room like this that they need to buy something that will only suit the kind of lives that my children have. So when they're old enough to ride, they won't remember what Sunday mornings used to sound like because they live in a completely different age in terms of mobility and transportation and whatever happens to flick their minds onto wanting to be on two wheels. I haven't seen it happen yet. That's the problem with EV in particular, I think. But you know, at EICMA last year, we saw other manufacturers unveiling hybrid technology. Everybody's kind of moving towards something, but at the minute, I don't think there's any North Star where everybody knows we need to go that way.
Because so much is driven by legislation, right? It's not driven by you guys as brands and companies and engineers going, please, can we throw, you know, can the combustion engine out the window and head down this path? So it's all driven by mostly politicians who are only in office for 4 years, and we all have to live with it for a very long time afterwards. So I guess, you know, as punters, we're just hungry to know there's other things being considered, whether it's different fuels. I mean, I can imagine hybrids a bit complicated on a motorcycle because it's going to take up so much room, or whether we're, you know, are we playing with hydrogen engines yet? I mean, hover bikes would be nice. But, you know, where's the other opportunity for us to have a bit of visceral grit and noise and vibe?
Well, just one of the points to make, and I kind of agree with almost everything that's been said, but it's the first time that we've seen consortiums of organizations talking to each other to try and solve a problem. So, for instance, is swappable batteries something that is, you know, part of the future solving a problem? Or is it, you know, hydrogen engines or whatever the case may be? And I think what's exciting for me is I think anything, you know, you have innovation and then basically you maximize that innovation and you create some kind of scale that you can turn into a business. And I don't think we've hit that tipping point of being able to produce something which is really a standard in our sector, which, you know, everybody can easily adopt to, and it can give you the kind of experience that you would need in order to, you know, I've invested £20,000 into a bike and the tech is really where it should be. So what I'm kind of saying is I think it's a very interesting period because I think what we have is still going to be around for a while and we can do a lot with it. I think there's a lot of conversations by big organizations trying to figure out what the next big thing is, and those organizations are very healthy because it's going to drive some form of innovation. And then the third piece is, I mean, electrification is there to stay, and it is going to be something significant. But I think we still have to solve that, you know, that problem, which is, you know, cost and performance. And I think that's getting solved more in the automotive sector, and it's finding its right, you know, place in terms of performance and price. That's something that, you know, is going to come a couple of years later, in my opinion, but it will come for sure. And I think everybody is thinking about it. I mean, that's you know, that's clear. It has to be part of what you wake up for every morning.
I guess the one question I've got is what happens if in 10 years' time, the next generation of legislators and our kids, who are a bit more grown up and have the vote, turn around and say, all this electric stuff is awful for the environment, lithium mining and boron and where's the power coming from anyway? And, I spend a lot of time in California now, and when it's really hot, the government texts you and says, please turn off your air conditioning because we haven't got enough power in the grid. So what happens if the next generation turn around and go, this sucks, please stop ruining the planet with this electric power?
You'll have a lot of big batteries with handlebars that can, power your home. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding.
But it's, do we need to be a step ahead?
I think it will find a way, Dutch, in the same way that, again, I'll try not just to hark back to the 90s and the good old days every time I speak.
You can if you want, it's fine.
Everybody in this room can remember a time when every single piece of motorcycle joy they took in media terms came from walking to the shops and buying a magazine. You had to do that. If you want to find out about next year's bikes, you're buying a piece of tree and you're turning it over, and there lies the passion. And when magazine sales started to dip, and I owned Superbike magazine, I saw it and worked it firsthand. The old guys, the old heads in the room don't know what to do because they've spent their entire careers focusing on traditional publishing and traditional methods of reaching an audience. And then the young kid sat in the corner of the room going, and there's this thing called the internet. Has anybody heard of YouTube? And everybody shushes him down. And then fast forward to now, and everybody that's here knows because of Instagram what's going on this weekend. Somebody will find a way that works for everybody at the time. So I think the danger, or what I wouldn't focus on, is trying to find the answer for the audience that doesn't exist yet. It's about trying to manage the journey from where we are now and giving that audience the best possible chance of being able to still want to spend their weekends and spend their own money coming and looking at two wheels. We won't call them motorbikes then, whatever they're going to be called. There'll be a corner where the synthetic fuel bikes live, and it's great to see little gaps in EU legislation that was passed this year where by 2035 everything has to be carbon neutral. But there was one line right at the bottom that I think most people got bored and didn't get that far. But it says if as a manufacturer you produce fewer than 1,000 units a year, have at it, don't worry about it. You can still make massive petrol, supercharged V8s, as long as you make fewer than 1,000 a year. So the answer isn't in one solution, I don't think, but I think it's about just trying to be open-minded enough to accept that right now, very, very clever people don't have all of the answers.
Yeah. So could we end up with a future where motorcycling is just a very expensive luxury for those of us who want to use an internal combustion engine?
I think there's definitely an element in, that annoying guy at the street who owns a classic 911 who's putting synthetic fuel in on a Sunday morning, and he tips a couple of litres in his V4 Norton, which you can buy over there. But he's travelling to work Monday to Friday on an electric scooter because what he needs is a couple of different solutions to do a couple of different jobs. You don't own a Range Rover and take it on track days. You don't try and fill a Porsche full of your family and drive them around Europe. It's about what you can afford and what you can appreciate. And I guess for me, the day of the week that I'm clinging onto is the Sunday morning when you're using synthetic fuel and making a bit of noise, or hydrogen combustion. And again, the four-wheel space is absolutely leading the way in terms of the research that they're doing. Toyota have their own city. They've built an entire city that runs on hydrogen, and it's just for research purposes. And this is a manufacturer that gave us the Prius. They gifted us with hybrid technology and EV technology, and they've already moved on, and they're looking at hydrogen. So they're running a 500 horsepower GR Yaris in some crazy endurance races in Japan, and it runs on hydrogen, and it makes exactly the same sound, and it goes just as fast. There's just nothing coming out of the tailpipe. So the answers are out there, but there are so many to choose from. I think at the minute we maybe are looking for that one answer that gives us all the confidence that the future is going to be fine. Honestly, I don't know what that answer is yet, and I'm not sure that anybody does yet.
And are the manufacturers working together to...
We're not.
To hang on? Because the thing, okay, so hopefully I'm representing what all of you guys are thinking and worried about. Because for me, you want to imagine that there's this incredible movement of captains of industry out there building stuff who all have common interests in a niche business, fighting for that corner of lifestyle. And we had this conversation last night. Horse riding used to be transport. If any of you ride a horse now, where are you going? Nowhere. You're going to and from the same stable, right? And skiing used to be transport. If you lived in the mountains, hiking, walking. and now we're just apparently eroding Mount Snowdon and littering it, so that's a bad thing. Surfing litters beaches. There are lots of things we do that used to be about transportation that are now a lifestyle. And and especially in America, and we should talk about America in a bit, Morgan, where everybody can shoot guns, which seems like a particularly bad idea a lot of the time, even though it's fun. There are lots of stupid things that we do that we have a right to do because they're really just for our own pleasure and entertainment. Can't motorcycling move away from transport legislation and put their hand up together collectively and say, excuse me, but we're a lifestyle. We have the right to exist on Earth. We either should be allowed to do this or we shouldn't really be allowed to do anything.
Well, a few points to that. I mean, I think the industry associations are standing up and presenting a case on behalf of all the manufacturers. And there are discussions that are happening with the regulators to try to find the right position. And there's two things on the minds of regulators. It's noise and it's emissions. And I think there's a lot going on both of those topics. I think from a regulator's perspective, the closest thing to a zero emission solution is electrification today. So they're going to push electrification as hard as they need to push it in order to shift or put pressure on the companies to make progress to come up with a solution. Okay, and I don't think they're only doing that in motorcycles. I think they're doing that, I mean, you see it with, even today with Euro 4 to Euro 5, Euro 5 plus, I mean, and it costs us millions and millions and millions of dollars just, shifting just to keep up with technology, besides, obviously doing all the R&D stuff that's needed as well. So I think if everybody believed that electrification was the only solution, we'd be going to a dishwasher company and hiring a dishwasher technician and putting wheels on a big battery, and that would be the end of it, and we wouldn't spend any more money in R&D. I can certainly say from my perspective that's not the case, and I don't think that's the case for anyone else either. So I firmly believe that there's still a very, very big leisure and a very important leisure part of motorcycling that's never going to go away. I think there's going to be a crossover between new technologies that is still going to be new tech and leisure, like, e-mountain biking as an example. I mean, and then you're going to have kind of the transportation solution which needs to be solved for. And today, I mean, if you look at motor vehicles going into a city in traffic jams, and you see the emissions that problematically, I would say, it's a big issue for everybody. It's probably more than the entire motorcycling emissions, going into the city, solving a transportation situation. So I think it's just today, there's a lot of tap dancing, and I definitely think it's going to be a massive part of the solution in the future, but I really don't think it's the only thing. And I don't think the leisure part of motorcycling is going to disappear. The demographics may change a bit. The price tag may change, the tech may change, and people may go, well, it's not what it used to be, and I don't love it as much. But I think it can coexist. And going back to the Porsche example, I mean, everybody loves the 911, there's no question. But you hop into a Taycan and you're like, whoa, this is a different experience. It's awesome, and I want both. So.
Do you see four-wheel technology being a threat to that aspect of motorcycling at any point? Like, as self-driving trucks become a larger factor and motorcycles are just flies buzzing around their head, do you see legislation possibly threatening that at any point?
Well, I'll try and make this brief and then let somebody else say something about that. But I would say that the only thing that I would say is that safety is a massive issue, and it drives everything, insurance, you name it. So, I mean, I think everybody is expected to bring more tech onto the vehicles to reduce risk. And I think everybody's thinking about that. So that's going to be a big part of it. And I think a lot of what transfers from automotive to two wheels is actually a good thing. But how important it's going to be, relatively speaking, to what exists in four wheels today, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what you guys think.
I think we're looking at integrated systems going forward in some form or another, whether you're on a motorcycle and riding yourself, or in a car that is dealing with everything for you. You're going to be in a context of every vehicle being aware of every other vehicle.
Yeah, correct.
It's just a matter of how that's managed.
Well, as long as all the cars are aware of each other, we'll all be fine, right?
More aware of ourselves, I think, is the issue.
I suppose to your point as well, I think there's no denying that. Obviously, I think we're all safe. We're going to be able to ride combustion bikes until we die, probably, hopefully. And I can see them.
We shouldn't be selfish. We shouldn't. That's the point. Is we shouldn't selfishly just think, it's okay.
Yeah.
Somebody else can deal with that. I'll just carry on. I think the point that I was trying to make about being open is giving the next generation the opportunity to build whatever it is that works for them, rather than kind of selfishly holding them away from the audience that we all are, until the point that we
It's
just
also
check
an
out.
opportunity for bringing people into motorcycling.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at it from the perspective of we love the explosions underneath us and whatever else, and perhaps that's not what many people want.
Yeah.
You know, even today,
But if
there's perhaps a large percentage of the population that doesn't want that
doesn't get it.
and would actually ride a motorcycle if
Yeah.
we didn't have
But
that.
there's also the flip side, which is they're actually, they're pretty cool. There are some great EV bikes out there to ride,
Yeah.
and whether
They're
it's
quite amazing.
whether it's you riding on your own. The Live Wire is a great example, but that's a knee-down bike. You can, if you shut your eyes and pull hard enough, there's a wheelie in there, and it does all of the things that bikes should do. But when I'm taking my children to school, my youngest daughter and I can talk on an electric scooter while we're riding to school, which you can't do on a petrol
Yeah.
bike. And when she gets there, she chucks her jacket on the back of the bike. It doesn't burn on the exhaust. She doesn't burn her leg, like her older sisters have all done on petrol bikes over the years, going through that same experience. So there are definitely upsides to riding something that isn't noisy and doesn't need petrol from a station and all of that kind of stuff. It's just the experience and the joy that you take out of those experiences is completely different to the foundations of, I guess, what everybody in the room is into.
Well, I mean, motorcycling has always been at risk of being an exclusive club, right? I mean, you have people getting dressed up in your leathers, or adventure gear or whatever it is, and for everybody who looks at that as being part of that club and values that, there's also another percentage of people who look at that as that's keeping me away. I'm not part of the club. There's a barrier to entry into that. The petrol motor, in the way in the petrol motorcycles, perhaps could be one of those barriers, and if we were to shift and if we were to become more silent, it wouldn't be the experience that we enjoy, but there is a possibility there that it opens it up to a wider audience of people. The motorcycle industry in general looks at smaller sales and so on year. We look at having trouble, and this is not just for motorcycle, for automotive in general, trouble getting younger people to buy a vehicle. Forget the explosions or the not explosions, just buying the damn vehicle is a problem. How do we get those people to engage with motorcycling as an experience is really the question. And whether that's silent or explosive is I think for me, almost irrelevant. It's getting them on a bike.
Right.
That's my goal, because that's how the industry continues.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I wanted to talk about before we get too quick to the end is how it affects brand, because we were gathered around your builds yesterday, and everybody was centered around that beautiful bike where it's mostly just an engine. And then a huge amount
gave
of
him a
work
bike,
with
threw it away.
threw the rest of the bike. And obviously, we got 3 brands here that are all about engine configuration, all about kind of big V twins and the parallel twins and the V4s and the Royal Enfield 650 twin and all the. I mean, when people ask me about motorcycles, you always end up starting to talk about the engine and the configuration of the engine and how it delivers power is such a part of the brand and the brand story. Surely if everybody's riding around on interchangeable Panasonic batteried motorcycles with one of 3 different electric engine manufacturers, and all you're doing is putting a different badge on the tank, how do you maintain that brand story?
Does it make a difference if you put your batteries like this?
Maybe it does. Maybe it does. But I mean, surely
Very good at
that's part of
styling
it.
boxes.
Yeah, because we're not just buying into a pretty badge. We're buying into a configuration and a feeling and a vibe,
For sure.
and especially Morgan representing America all on his own. The big V twin, and obviously a huge market for you guys. I mean, how does that translate? I mean, because there's a fear that we're just going to have one homologous group of motorcycles all exactly the same thing with a slightly different badge on the tank. What's the solution?
Brand is an idea, right? It's something that
Yeah.
it's an accumulated history and associations and so on that you are buying into, and in may involve the motor configuration. It may involve just the iconography around that brand. It's never one thing, and so for a brand to evolve in an evolving industry, that association has to be built up, that relevance to the brand has to be built up, and the brand has to position itself in such a way as to take advantages of all those things that are moving it, rather than be moved by it. If you're only being responsive to it, you're going to be screwed. very quickly. If you look at ahead and go, this is where it's going, this is what it means for us, this is how we position ourselves in this context, you've got something. And you can build that irrespective of your engine configuration. I mean, look at just like chassis components on motorcycles. You know, we will use several different shock suppliers, several different fork suppliers for any given model, right? We could have our frame manufactured in somewhere else. In the same frame, we could have it manufactured in 4 different places. You wouldn't know when you have the motorcycle. So that if we take that same approach to also the motor, or the driving motive force, let's say, of the motorcycle, does that really matter so much? I mean, now it does, because we have made that a big part of our communications and our marketing and so on. But moving forward, maybe not. And we just have to get ahead of that and be very conscious that it is going to change, and to build our future legacy around that.
Yeah, I would just say the brand equity piece is critical. I mean, I look at ourselves, I can't speak for anyone else, but Indian Motorcycle 10 years ago, we didn't have much in the portfolio. It's over a 100-year-old brand, but now we have 5 platforms with 36 different models, and that's in 10 years. And there's a bunch of bikes that, I wouldn't say wouldn't have traditionally been in our DNA, but we developed the bike, like FTR as an example. We went out and did something with it. It tied in well to the DNA. We could see that as being part of something authentic that we did, and we resourced that. And I think that's exciting, right? Because I mean, the first iPhone came out and everybody was like, damn, you either want this or you don't want it. It's a brick. But now you can't imagine going back to Motorola flip phones. So yeah. I think technology is exceptionally exciting, and I think we were having this discussion even on AI. I mean, things are changing so quickly these days. It's kind of like scares the crap out of you, and it excites you at the same time. And you can't quite decide what it is. And I think that's certainly what I like about my job, because I wake up every single day and I'm like, okay, the stuff that we have, we've got to make it better. Then you've got this kind of like next 5 years in front of you, and what does that innovation cycle look like? And then there's all this other, really, really interesting stuff that doesn't live in your space necessarily today, every day, but it's definitely going to be a part of the future. It just depends what percentage. And that's the cool stuff. I mean, that's when you shut your laptop, you don't send mails, put your feet up on the desk and put some crazy ideas up on the board, and then phone your engineers and they swear at you, which is great. So, it's, I don't know, I think it's a very exciting time, quite frankly.
I think it's also interesting to point out the AI example that we're talking about, how quick that's happened, and that being very scary, and that having real implications very, very quickly for automotive, because of the legislative, because of the time it takes to develop these technologies, to make them safe, to make them reliable, get them on road. We have a little bit of an advantage in the sense that it's not going to happen like that. We have a little bit of time to sort of bed in with things, to get used to them, to think about what that means for our future. These other technologies, maybe they are moving so fast you don't have time to catch up, you don't have time to think about it, it's just happened, and that's it. Now you're just responding to it. Yeah. But we can see that, we can maybe get a sense, we can game it out a little bit further, and that's a very positive for the industry, I think.
And that's what I was saying about the combustion engine, got some life left in it. Anyone who sat behind a steam engine, and I went to a traction, I'm not a steam engine buff, I went to a traction engine fair.
It's cool, man.
And there was, it's okay, but it's fascinating. And there was a lorry in there, effectively looked like a contemporary lorry, and it was the steam's last attempt to say, we can do what diesel does. And it was really trying, and it looked the part and everything, that was a steam, and they did Land's End to John and Groats, where it was steam saying, we're the best thing still. And I think there's a moment, I've not really experienced a lot of electric stuff yet, but anyone I know that's driven electric says as soon as they sit behind a car that's smoking, out of the back, they said it looks Victorian. But I think there's going to be, like you said, there's this transition where there'll be this passing. I think there'll always be this moment where there'll be this combustion thing. You'll see it at the weekend, these guys zipping about to the one petrol station where they can get gasoline still. But I guess when I think about it, we talk about consumers as tribes, and never more is that true in biking. Bikers are very much a tribe, but inside that, there's lots of little tribes of if you're a cruiser guy, or if you're a supermoto boy, or if you're a street bike, and what's interesting is about sort of embracing all of those, and then using that to try and overcome the negatives. And it's interesting, this is a research group of one, watching my 12-year-old, he's got a dirt bike that's petrol, tricky to kickstart, just got a Sur-on, he's ditched his gaming, he doesn't get off the Sur-on, he's run it ragged. He's already talking to me about the 72-volt kit that he's found that can pimp it. And then it's that idea of, at the moment, everyone's on a level playing field, aren't they? Electric's electric. But actually, when I think you start playing to the benefits and say, well, actually, this one will get you more range, but this one's going to be insanely quick. And I think then, and when customization scene enters that world, then it'll become, again, I think we'll have these pockets of tribes. And for my kids' generation, they'll find that same satisfaction. This show will probably all be EV bikes. And I think the shift concept was a little bit about that, of just saying, people, our generation maybe see the electrification as a negative. I haven't got the visceral bit, I haven't got the noise, I haven't got the explosions. So what could I make a positive out of that? And actually the positive could be that one bike doesn't have to be one bike. It could be 3 bikes. And then suddenly when I'm weighing up my decisions, I have the noise, or I have a bike that on Sunday it's an adventure bike and it gives me a single cylinder power delivery. I can then do some sports racing at the weekend on the bars, and then actually when I come down into town, I'm sick of that. I can go into cruiser mode and it goes from a flat 4 to a V-twin. And I can and then it's like I get my cake and eat it, and more cake. So I think it's how can we probably in the future make all those positives out of the things at the moment we see as a compromise. It's about ramping up and I'm quite excited. I think these lane change moments, I've got it in my own industry, where legislation and stuff is forcing us, because if we don't get forced, we'll do the same thing over and over again. And for some people, that's like, no, fuck's sake. But it's an opportunity, I think, for really exciting stuff. You know?
Dutch, what about a question for you then? We were laughing earlier about how it's been 10 years since the first Bike Shed show. When did the idea of having an EV bike at a show like this creep in for you? When was the first time you displayed one here?
I think probably just before COVID.
Okay.
Was probably the first. I mean, the thing is, obviously, we were about custom culture. And so it was a question of who was going to submit one that we thought was worth seeing. I mean, when we put our show together, our question is, for all you people who bought a ticket, would you go away thinking that was worth it? And I know why every bike in the room was there. And so it just needed to fit that criteria. So we never had a thing of, well, we won't have because people used to say, oh, you know, you wouldn't have electric bikes at your show, would you? And we go, well, if it's cool, it's cool.
Yeah.
So I think it's just got to tick all those boxes. It's got to be part of culture. It's got to have a vibe. It's got to have some soul.
Well, it's still a motorcycle, and you've customized
Yeah,
it.
it's
so
still a
by the base
motorcycle.
criteria of what
Yeah.
we're doing here,
Yeah,
all good.
it is still a motorcycle.
I mean, and I don't want to give away ideas, but I'm still waiting as a custom bike builder, because it would be so much simpler than trying to restore a 1970s engine before I even start fabricating and shaping stuff. If I could go to a site and say, I want this much power, this much range, and someone configures here's a throttle, a battery, and a motor, and send it out as a pack, you know, it'd be incredible. From a custom bike perspective, I'd love that. At the moment, I'm sort of scouring Etsy and different sites and trying to work out how to put it all together. And I think Luke Muse, he converted that R100, which I thought was a really beautiful idea of electrifying things of the past and bringing them into a contemporary space. But he's now starting to do that kit thing. And I think that will then, I could imagine next year, there might be more of that here, you know, which is quite exciting.
It's a great idea, thanks. I've got to go.
Well, we're talking about also another element of it here. So a lot of this is about electric power versus petrol power and so on. But you know, a lot of those elements that make a motorcycle will still be there simply because you have a human on a thing with 2 wheels.
It's dangerous.
It's dangerous. Forget danger. It's you still need to connect the human to the ground.
Yeah.
In a safe and stable manner. You know, and that's something that as manufacturers we deal with all the time. Is with hours and hundreds of thousands of miles of testing and so on, is putting people on this thing, sending it down the road, and having it take care of them. And so from a chassis development standpoint, we haven't talked about that at all, but that still needs to be there. You know, that's still a core thing. Person connected to road through 2 wheels. The motor's a nice bit in the middle that makes it go, and it's a bit that goes bang right now, and we all focus on, but there's this huge element of that, and there are going to be interesting ways in which we address that as well, because of whether it's electrification or hydrogen or whatever the eventual thing is. That changes, and so the rest of it changes around it.
Well, that's a nice segue into the 2 o'clock, which is about design. So
Looking out for you.
Actually, we're okay. We should probably wrap it up in a minute. I've got kind of one last question, though, which is about geography and culture. So we've got, you know, very much a sort of a brand, not quite an American brand, but a brand big in America. We've got a British, proper, you know, Norton. We've got Royal Enfield, kind of British culture, but huge Indian, you know, how many bikes did you build last year? 1 million?
In the world, aren't they?
We sell about 80,000 a month.
Yeah, so a lot of motorcycles. more than some
You have to
manufacturers
change your
make it a
brain
year.
when you think about that.
And also we've got culture, American motorcycle culture versus the way things are in Europe and Asia. I mean, surely none of these things are going to happen at the same pace. I mean, India's not going to drive legislation to say that you can't make the 350 single anytime soon. The UK is always trying to be a little bit different, and the American market is completely different. Well, how uneven is this going to be globally when you guys are all trying to homologate things across industries?
Yeah, historically we've seen motorcycles in America be built for crossing states like Kansas, that are hundreds of just incredibly large, and European motorcycles are much more compact, lightweight, made for riding through the mountains and stuff like that. How much is this going to affect the...
It's got to be part of the story, and in terms of also regulation as well, and timing and your market shares and who you're selling to. Are we going to have some manufacturers maybe that can hang on to the combustion engine for a bit longer just because of their location or their scale of production? How's that going to drive things? Or different, I mean, in America, every state is different.
Yeah.
Is it going to be that we can all buy, certain engines in Nevada that you can't buy in California? Is that going to be a thing?
The only thing that I would say is I think there's going to be a certain balance you have to find in your company between where you're trying to play. And if culture is a big part of what you do, then you're going to develop the culture. And if solving a transportation issue is part of the game, then you're going to be more focused on that. And there's going to be a different weighting, and that's going to evolve. For us, I mean, we made some big decisions. We're an American brand, for sure, there's no question. But 40% of our global volume comes out of the international business. And we work across, I think most of us probably 70-odd countries in the international business. There's tons of complexities. I was in Korea last week, and the usage is very, very different. But that's one of the reasons why, we have in Switzerland, we have a design center. We have a lot of European designers working for us. We have, we have tech sitting in Europe, and we've mimicked our design centers, and we talk to each other, and we're looking at global trends. And our last product platform, I would say, a massive amount of our focus was driven out of international, and it's a very easy way to solve for that. I mean, you just bring all your American colleagues over to Europe, and you stick them on bikes, and you make them ride through Chamonix, and as soon as they go around the twisties with big fat wheels, they're like, shit, we've got to change something. So, but I think that works, and it should be the way that we do things. So I would just answer that by saying, I think we are going to evolve, we are going to serve the global market, and we are going to adopt new technologies as we think, this is how it fits into the culture. This is how it lives in terms of part of our portfolio, and we'll innovate on the back end of that. But it's all an equation you're playing with every single day. But it's really something that moves all the time, quite frankly. So.
And for you guys, I mean, you have the scale to be quite diverse across different markets. Do you? Maybe?
Yeah, and it's about taking an international perspective. It's about keeping a finger on the pulse of any of these legislative changes that are constantly shifting and can change on a moment's notice, unfortunately. Gives us all quite a bit of headaches. It's also about finding where your key markets are, and saying, look, this is what we're designing for. Because at the end of the day, motorcycling being a recreational thing in many countries, it's not about appealing to the greatest number of people. It's about finding the right people and making that product for them. And so maybe, if you're aiming solely at the U.S. market, maybe it makes sense to make those fat tires, because that's what you're aiming for, and that's where you're focusing your brand, and that's speaking of the earlier question of brand building and so on, that's where I want to be. And the other people internationally are going to buy that because that's what they're buying into. They're buying into the idea, and if I compromise that idea, then maybe they don't. So we're always doing that careful dance of trying to get as many people as we can, but without diluting the product and the experience and the brand associations that we're selling them. And whether we're looking at, let's say, in our context, India or Europe or whatever, there are very different needs in those consumers. And in India, consumers not just recreational. There is an element of that, but it's still a very practical everyday product. And so we have to think very differently about those. And maybe a number of our consumers are looking at it for a commuting product, and we aim a product at them. We aim another product at, let's say, international markets, where it's all about the weekend ride. And it doesn't matter if it can fit between two cars that are like 2 feet apart or whatever. That's not the important thing. It's about going out there on the weekend. And so
it's quite different in a way for you guys because of that scale and that diversity. I mean, and John, and where does that come from
So for me,
your point of view?
I think the fortunate position that Norton finds itself in this year, the company's 125 years old, but it feels, to me, I've been there since October, and I'm sure everybody in the room knows the recent history that the company has been through. It feels like a really well-funded startup with 125 years of legacy. So we don't sell in international markets yet. We're still developing our dealer network in the UK. We've opened, with you guys at the Bike Shed, we've got the Atelier, and this week we've opened 3 dealerships. Last week it was the same. Next week will be the same. So we're in this relatively fortunate position where everybody knows our name, but we haven't played the game with them yet. So in terms of developing those international markets, much like Royal Enfield, we have this kind of heavyweight Indian big brother back in Chennai, where TVS Motors, who own Norton now, if the lights are on in Chennai, they can make 14,000 bikes in one day. In a day, they'll make twice as many bikes as Norton can make in a year. So this in terms of bringing scale and volume and the ability to immediately move into new markets with established product, they've got the experience to do all of that. They've got the finances, they've got the backing, and they've got the time. That's the great thing about being owned by TVS, and I don't want this to sound like an advert for Norton, is TVS have never bought and sold a company in its entire history, and they're nearly as old as Norton. So they're in this for the long game, and they need to get this right for us as a company. If we're going to move into the US, which we are, and it's already been published in the media and across Europe, there's completely different need states and desires that those markets have. The great thing is now, realistically, we only sell 3 variants of Norton. We've got Commando and then the 2 V4s. So we're right now looking at the market and going, we can get this right from the outset, rather than having to undo 100 years of amazing production. If you picture any of the big Japanese manufacturers, I think some of those guys are going to have a harder problem convincing the motorcyclists of tomorrow that they've got this product that suits them perfectly, because they've spent so long making so many different variations of what burns petrol that they're going to have to undo their own brand equity and their own kind of branding and all of that marketing work that goes on. Norton is in an interesting position. For me, that's part of the reason why I joined the company, is being able to help them form that story and create it and tell it to people. Like I say, everybody knows who Norton is, but nobody really knows who New Norton is. So it's an opportunity more than anything else, and again, part of the reason why I joined the company.
It's interesting you've gotten 3 different people here from brands that are going through let's say a rebirth in some form.
Yeah.
And whether intentional or otherwise,
history.
but our perspective
Absolutely.
and the perspective you're getting as a function of this panel are going to be highly biased somehow because of that. Let's say almost more startup mentality that I think everybody who joins into one of these companies is bringing to the game. That's the attraction point for a lot of us, isn't it?
Agreed.
Well, we are going to have to wrap it up because we've got to do another one of these. Thank you for all of your energy in being here to listen to us. Hope it was interesting. And yeah, we'll have to wrap it up because we're going to do another one in a minute and talk about design with some of the same guys. But thank you very much, John, Adrian, Grant, and Paul and Morgan. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Cheers.